Hey guys, this is Jay Calderon with Jay Unboxing. Thanks for clicking through here, and I'm here reacting to Bare Knuckle Fighting Championships Knucklemania pay-per-view, which happened earlier tonight. Disclaimer, I am in no way an expert on anything, specifically not BKFC, but I did tune in. There were a couple names there that I recognized and thought, hey, it'd be something kind of fun to check out. And it was pretty entertaining, to be honest with you. It was had some really good scraps. The fight of the night for me, I think, was, I'm going to try to say these names correctly here, Taylor Starling beating Charissa Sigala. This was via 5 round UD at 125 pounds. It was an opener of the main event. It really set the tone for the entire card. It was a bloody, bloody fight, but it really was an entertaining fight. Ultimately close, but they got the right winner, in my personal opinion, there. The next fight that I thought was of interest, of note, was former boxer Dat Nguyen taking on former champion Johnny Bedford in a lightweight clash and picking up the lightweight title for BKFC in the process. It was a really good fight too, and it just seemed that while Bedford was probably a good boxer for BKFC, and Nguyen had some wrinkles to his game that Bedford just couldn't seem to adapt to, and as a result of that, it ultimately failed him in the end. He competed, to be fair with you. I mean, he really did. He had his moments, and he had probably a chance to take it in the end, but ultimately that final round, the fifth round, and Guyan just used a little bit of his kind of, like I said, ring savvy to pull it out and ultimately won a, in my opinion, again, correct decision. And in the main event, former UFC contender Paige Van Zant lost in her, quote, $1 million fight deal and the debut to that deal against Britton Hart, a person named Britton who is German, who lives in the south of America. And I don't know, it just felt like she had a bit of an issue or trouble maybe adjusting to the slight difference in, I mean, there's quite a bit of a difference, but in terms of the striking, the differences in the rules between MMA and bare knuckle fighting, perhaps, and she just didn't seem to adjust until a bit later, and ultimately had her best moments in those latter rounds, but it probably was too little too late. She probably needed a little bit of an easier touch too. I mean, I don't know much about Britton Hart, but she seemed like she was a pretty solid fighter herself. Certainly could take a punch, didn't freeze up in the moment. They could have perhaps matched Paige against someone who was sort of put, without trying to make this sound so obvious, sort of put there to make her look good in her opening fight. I think that would have helped long term to then set up those more tougher, more meaningful fights for Paige. But they, went ahead and matched her up with Hart here, and she ended up taking a loss pretty well. She applauded her opponent, congratulated her, and it was something that I think everyone in the what was reported sold out crowd would have agreed. Hey, she lost the fight fair and square. It wasn't all bad, though, I have to say, in fairness to her. This is still something that I think brought in a lot of new eyeballs to the sport, and it is sort of a hybrid of sports. So, her bringing new fans in ultimately is never going to be a bad thing for BKFC. And as long as she can rebound, and she has, I believe, a 4 fight deal with them, so now 3 fights remaining, she can rebound in the next fight and still potentially come back and really, make the most of those last 2 fights on this current deal. I think she could still turn this deal around and make it not something that was spoiled on its opening night. Now, for me personally, in terms of just the reaction to the overall event, I would say there are some pros and cons. There was quite a lot to like, to be honest with you. It was fast paced. They have 2 minute rounds for obvious reasons. It's a little bit more wild in there, so you're going to get a little more tired than just a traditional boxing match. Not to mention the fact that, of course, you're not wearing gloves, so it's going to be more damage in a shorter period of time. And it has a unique look to it overall. Not just the action, but also just the aesthetics of. They're sort of in a hybrid between a ring because of the ropes and the sort of quote unquote corners or turnbuckles of sorts, but they also have an octagon shape to them. So it has a weird hybrid mix to it that way that actually is kind of appealing because it's kind of wide open. So you get camera angles and up close shots that you wouldn't necessarily get without a cage grate in the way or ropes that are kind of right there in front of the camera. It's also just another place for fighters to make money, and that's always an important thing. I'm a pro fighter kind of guy, so if someone can, find a way to make more money in the sport of fighting, if you want to call it that as a general term, then I'm all for it. I don't know how much money there is to be made in BKFC, for example, but if there's at least a chance of that after a fighter maybe doesn't quite make it in MMA or doesn't quite make it as a boxer, I'm all for it. And plus, it's yet another way for me to watch some fights, which I'm never really going to complain about. It also has a potential cross sport events in the future where you might have a guy who is talking. I mean, we all see it nowadays on everyone on Twitter talking trash to each other. You might see a guy who's an MMA fighter versus a boxer talking a little bit of trash, and all of a sudden, this, if they don't have the sort of leverage that you would think they do to just move from one sport to the other and make a fight, this could be a way for them to sort of meet in the middle and make those kinds of fights take place, similar to what Paulie Malignaggi did back in the day with Bkfc and a fighter whose name slips my mind, and I do apologize to him. But so some of those sorts of things can happen, and that could be interesting and rather entertaining for the future. There were some perhaps drawbacks that I kind of thought about as I watched the event, though. I mean, is there really an audience? I mean, there's part of me that thinks maybe they get caught in that middle ground where maybe people will tune in, and hopefully they do have an audience and it grows, and hopefully bringing in people who people have already heard of like a Paige Van Zant can bring in an audience. But I kind of wonder is it's almost not to get too poetic here, but it's almost as if the kind of pit, the ring that they fight in, is sort of a perfect microcosm of what they are as a sport, where it's sort of like boxing, it's sort of like MMA. But if you're a boxing fan predominantly or an MMA fan predominantly, you're not going to get quite enough of what you're looking for. You as an MMA fan might notice that it looks more like a boxing ring and it turns you off. You as a boxing fan might notice it looks too much like an octagon and might turn you off to the fact that it's actually more of a hybrid of the two. And I kind of wonder if it's going to get caught a little bit in that no man's land there in the middle. And again, as I mentioned before, is there enough money to actually make this worth the risk? Because one thing I also thought about is due to the fact that they do have a significantly, you know, riskier time of, potentially getting things like cuts and nicks and scrapes along their face. How long could a career really last in bare knuckle fighting? When you think about just the amount of cuts people could receive and all the scar tissue and the wear and tear you'd have on your face, forget just the fact that obviously you're going to get beaten up more. That actually might help you to some degree in that you might get knocked out faster, which means that you take less punishment. But just the scar tissue and just the cuts around the eyes and things of that nature, where you are very, very vulnerable, especially if it's just more or less bare knuckles hitting your face. That leads me to believe you're going to have short careers against people who are not huge stars, and you really have to be someone with your own name going into the sport who's willing to help the sport grow so it's worth it for other people, maybe even a little bit more than yourself. And I just don't know if a lot of fighters are going to want to do that. But anyway, let me know what your guys' thoughts are. Any kind of comments, go ahead, leave them down there in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. And also, question for you guys: would you watch again if you watched? I certainly would if the right names were in there, like a Paige Van Zant, like a Paulie Malignaggi, and so on and so forth. Just seeing different people in a different element is always kind of interesting to me. So I certainly would under the right circumstances. But what about you guys? Go ahead and let me know down there in the comments. Of course, make sure to like, subscribe, share, all that kind of good stuff. Be sure to follow me on Twitter at jcalderon_job. And until next time.